Hello CIT 230 Section 20 classmates. My name is Bryce Newell, and this is my student presentation of CSS Specificity. What even is CSS Specificity, and why do I need to know about it? Specificity is the determining factor of which CSS rules are applied by the browser. Specificity is likely the reason why your CSS rules don't apply even when you think that they should. Specificity is incredibly important to making a website look the way we would like, but it can also be difficult at times. Now, determining which CSS rules are applied by the browser is up to us by understanding specificity and working with it. I have decided to attach the world's nerdiest example of specificity to illustrate a point. The strength of our selectors matter. As you can see, we have our specificity represented by little figurines and Sith power. Now each selector is stronger than the last, starting with elements as the weakest, classes, IDs, and finally styles as the strongest. You could see this with the picture of the stormtrooper leading up to your Sith Lords. Now there's a bonus of exclamation point important, which, as you guessed it, is more important than the others and overrides a lot of the other rules. Now we should rarely use important in our document because it is far more specific than we usually need, and we can get around this in many other ways. 0, 0, 0, 0. This is an example of how specificity is often written. The current case has a specificity of 0 or no specificity. A specificity of 0 is acquired when using the universal selector, shown there as an asterisk, or a selector that is simply inherited from a parent. Selectors that have a specificity of 0, 0, 0, 0 are easily changed or adjusted for our needs on the web page with the addition of any new selector later on. Each of the zeros relate to a different portion of specificity. Inline styles are the first 0, IDs are the second 0, which is the second strongest. The third 0 relates to classes and attributes, as well as pseudo classes. The last is the weakest and only applies to elements and pseudo elements. So I have prepared a video that demonstrates the power of CSS specificity. I have included a top paragraph right here, which has an inline style of color red, a class of test, and an ID of test2. The second paragraph just has a class of test1. The third paragraph has a class of test1 and an ID of test2. And the final paragraph has an ID of test2. By activating the rules I have set below, which react with all the different types of styles, we have a default color of black in the background of the inline with the first one, coloring it red immediately. Now if we activate the element selector right here, just paragraph, you can see that it affects the 3 bottom paragraphs and changes them all blue, but it does not affect the inline style. If we go one step farther, we press the one with test1. You can see that it turns all the ones except for the first one with that inline style to the color green as requested. Now where it gets kind of funky is this next one, where it changes the color to orange. Completely overrides the first test because this is the test that was put in afterward. I'm not a big fan of orange, so I'm actually going to take that off. Right here we have the final test, which is that ID test, test2. If we push it, you can see the ones with ID test2 have completely overridden all the ones that came before it. So you can see that we have the original one, which applies over just that basic. It's the weakest, just the element selector. This one contains an element as well as a class selector. So it easily overrode just the element because it has a specificity of 11 or 011. The one following it with that orange is the same, but because of the order it's in, it deletes that copy. And finally, the copy test2 with a specificity of 100 or 0100 changes those final two, overwriting the styles that came before because it has the highest specificity. Because the inline specificity has the inline style has a specificity of 1000 or 1000, it is not affected by any of these other ones because it has the highest specificity and will not be affected by any lower specificities whatsoever. To illustrate this point farther, I have included this CSS selector specificity cheat sheet. Now you can see the different classes that it shows with the asterisks showing the highest level of specificity, inline styles, IDs showing the second highest level, or the ID selectors, hashtag styles, classes as the next selector, which is represented by the period, or sometimes pseudo classes represented by a colon, and elements sharing the same thing as just a single element or multiple elements in a line. And a pseudo elements represented as well with an element and a pseudo element colon. Now you could see that there's a great difference between all these styles, and you might think by looking at this that perhaps you could have 10 elements equal a single class, but this is just not true, and you cannot, the classes will always beat the elements no matter how many elements you have. This is just for your own use and knowledge on the subject. Now it could be useful to read the lists of specificity numbers instead as numbers to fully understand their strengths in relation with one another. As you can see with an inline style represented as style equals quotations, it has a specificity of 1000 or 1000. Now this is the strongest specificity, and compared to a list item represented by li with a specificity of 0001 or just 1, it will always be stronger. If you were to have a situation where you had an inline style on a list item, the inline style would always beat whatever list item requirements you put in your CSS document. Now, there's an easy way to calculate specificity in Visual Studio Code if you have it, if that's what you're using. Now you could always calculate it the way we have just spoken about, but you can also just hover your mouse over any of the selectors and it'll give you the specificity starting with the second 0. It won't include the first 0 because the first 0 is reserved just for inline styles, which are a part of your HTML document. So why doesn't my rule work? There are pretty much two situations why your rule doesn't work. Ignoring user error, which is my normal problem. When two selectors are for the same rule, the one with the highest specificity reigns supreme. So when you have two or more selectors, such as the example below, where you have H1 color yellow, an item selector content H1 color red, and an H1 class selector content color blue. Now the content for this will always be colored red because it has a specificity rating of 0101 or 101 versus a lower rating of 0001 or 1 for the color yellow that just includes the element, or 0011 or 11 for blue, which is the element and the class selector. Now when you have two selectors that share the same specificity for the same element, you go for the one that's most recent. In essence, if your rules are paragraph color red, background yellow, and paragraph color green, you will always receive a paragraph with green text and a yellow background, which would likely look terrible, but I don't know. The point is that your second paragraph that second selector paragraph will always overwrite the first one simply because it was mentioned afterwards. It always erases the first rule you went. So perhaps this is your intention, but I think for the most part it is better just to edit the rules you currently have. So what is CSS specificity? Well, CSS specificity is over-specific at times without prior knowledge of why it is the way it is. If you can understand inline styles, ID selectors, classes, elements, and pseudo-classes and pseudo-elements, then it is not really the same difficult concept that you started out thinking about. What is so great about it being as specific as it is, while it can be a pain sometimes, is that it allows us to have the freedom to really do whatever we want with the web page as long as we understand what we're looking at. So thank goodness for CSS specificity.